would hit OK and then go to slideshow.
I tried to set up show.
No, that's not what we want.
No.
Wait, slideshow type.
I tried all three of them.
It didn't work.
No.
Screen, hit the screen dot down at the bottom. No.
Yeah, I'll live.
In 365, it's, well, that's not going to help you.
Okay. It's just about time for us to start.
So this will,
Let me turn the microphone on. We'll be starting in about 1 minute. Just give a few more people time to roll in, and then we'll start the blue sheets going around. Okay, they're right there. Oh, okay. We'll just use one. Write in both of our names as well. Thank you. Today is the 13th, yes. The lucky day.
I was talking with Ally. Yes.
Oh, yes.
And he pointed out that if you try and do service function chaining with a segment rounding label string.
We're about to start. So.
Okay.
I need to find you an Adrian for a second.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. I'm Andy Malice. This is Stuart Bryant. Welcome to PALS. And our working group secretary, Dave Sinico. This is the note well. I'm sure you've seen it before, and you'll be seeing it again. It has not changed since the last meeting. Okay, this is our agenda. It's a short agenda, so hopefully we won't take the entire hour. First is the current report that I'm doing right now. Secondly, we'll be talking about the Ethernet control word draft. And are there any comments anyone would like to make on the agenda? Anything anyone would like to add at the last minute?
Just a short, very short discussion. Just a very short discussion on the liaison and who we send it to about the control word draft.
Very good. Dave just pointed out that we need to send out a liaison about the control word draft to some other STOs. So we'll just very quickly go through the list of organizations that we plan to send the liaison to. Okay, so we've had some new RFCs since the last IETF, RFC 8220 on PIM over virtual private LAN services, the VPLS, and RFC 8237 on MPLS LSP pseudowire status refresh reduction. We've had 16 RFCs published in the last 2 years, so we've been quite productive. We have one draft on the RFC editor's queue still right now, P to MP, PW, LSP ping, and it looks like we just cleared up the last discuss on that draft. There was a new revision that just came out earlier today. There was a discuss on it in the IESG. It looks like it's been cleared. So hopefully this will be going to the RFC editor very, very shortly. And I'm sorry, I was talking about the wrong draft. That's on the next one. This one that's on the RFC editor's queue is waiting for the next draft I was talking about. So this is the draft that just went through IESG processing and it was just revised today based upon the security AD review and the security directorate reviews. The issue, and this is something that I'd like to make sure you're all aware of, because it affects work in this group and work in the MPLS working group. The issue is that LDP, which of course we use heavily for pseudowires as the control plane, currently relies on MD5 for cryptographic security of its messages. But as we all know, MD5 no longer meets current security requirements in the IETF. So this issue really needs to be solved in the MPLS working group, not in this working group, because it's the MPLS working group that has ownership of LDP, and it affects all drafts that use LDP, not just this one, but any future work that uses LDP will run up against this. So the MPLS and PALS working group chairs and Deborah, who just walked in, hi Deborah, are working together on a solution, which would be a new draft in the MPLS working group on LDP security to replace MD5. There's been a discussion currently ongoing on the PALS email list. So you may have seen it already if you've been following the email, either on this list or on the MPLS list. And it looks like the right answer is to move to TCP/AO with either SHA-1 or SHA-256 as the hashing algorithm. And so there'll be further discussion and a draft coming out from this. Yeah, absolutely.
I'd like to add a little bit more to that. So this is not just an LDP problem. This is actually a problem for all of the TCP-based routing protocols. And I think they have two problems. One is that there isn't a default widely agreed crypto function. And secondly, there's no negotiation function that anyone has actually built. What all TCP/AO lets you do is to say what encryption function you're going to use. We should probably work with all of the routing working groups that use TCP in order to have a common approach to this. And that some of the technology is not even in the routing area control. It's really in transport and security areas control. And the whole thing would be a whole lot easier if there was some good public domain open source implementations of the whole stack that people could either copy or just take. Do you want to add anything to that, Deborah?
Deborah, so as Stuart pointed out, this actually came up other Stuart came up in PCE. We just finished the document there too that we changed it from MD5 to TCP/AO. So it's kind of I think the routing areas have been really the ones lagging behind, the changing out of MD5. So I think it's very good for the race this. Caused some disgruntlement when I saw that it kind of blocked the documents for it, but it all has a good outcome because we, try to, rationalize why we were so condemning by, but it's good for people now to be up to it. And
right.
As Stuart said, yes, it gets an open source implementation being better.
Indeed.
Okay. Any other comments or questions before we move on? So we have one other working group draft, and that's going to be the rest of today's agenda, PALS Ethernet control word. Let me put that up, and Stuart will be doing the presentation.
So before I start, who didn't hear the previous version of this presentation last time? Because if you want, okay, all right. So I will go through the introduction slides, which briefly introduce the problem. Okay, next slide, please, Andy. So the story so far. A number of operators have experienced problems with misordering in their network of Ethernet packets. And this was attributed to some of the PEs not using the pseudowire control word for Ethernet, and the IEEE now quite legitimately, although issuing MAC addresses that start with 04 or 06, which look a bit like IP addresses, IP header starts. Now, I suppose I should have added something that Pat said last time, which is that there are other criteria as well that can cause that to happen. This is the one we're all familiar with, but there are more subtle reasons why it can happen. And so what's happening is that pretty well all of the vendors do a DPI-based ECMP, and so they go and have a peek behind the label stack, somewhat against the sort of architecture of MPLS, but they do it anyway. They say, I see a 4, so it must be an IPv4 packet, and then they go and do the standard 5-tuple hash calculation, which is a bit of a problem if it's some random bits inside an Ethernet header, and the packet goes off some way other than the way they expected it to. So the result is a missequence. The result is a lot of time and money spent by the operator community trying to figure out why a customer has complained that the packets aren't arriving in order. So the next thing that has happened is that we spoke about this at the last IETF, because the chairs are both authors. Dave Sinicrow, Matthew Bockey is managing the process on our behalf, and so we've got an adopted draft. Andy will talk about who we're going to liaise it to. We should have liaised it to some other third parties. Now, it turns out that some vendors are, in some circumstances, using 0x0, nibble 0, the start of the control word, as a hint that what follows is an Ethernet pseudowire packet. So they skip, I presume, 14 bytes, but I don't know the exact number, and they say, we'll do the 5-tuple hash on the IP packet that we assume follows. We didn't know about this at the last IETF, so this is an extra piece of material. Next slide, please. So what I would like to do at this meeting, if the working group agrees, is for us to look at some critical pieces of text that are in the document, the core of our recommendation for the two scenarios, for us to agree we at least with the people here, what the text needs to say, and hopefully that will save a lot of email exchanges.
Can you elaborate what are they doing wrong?
Oh, what some vendors have got a switch that they can turn on, and when you turn the switch on, it looks down the MPLS label stack just like we do at the moment, and it says if there's a 4 or a 6, then we'll do the standard 4 or 6 thing, yes. But if there's a 0, it must be an Ethernet pseudowire. So skip 14 bytes on, which I believe is the right number, the right magic number, and start looking for an IP header there, and say if we see an IP header there, it must be IP over Ethernet. We want to play Russian roulette with the customer traffic. We will do our 5-tuple load balance. That's what's going on. What's wrong with it? Well, they don't always get it right.
Well,
They don't always get it right.
not only that, but they assume that the only pseudowire type is Ethernet. So if it's any other type of pseudowire than Ethernet, then they're hashing on who knows what.
Well, and it could be that there's a legitimate packet following the MPLS label stack that starts with 00 that could be anything. Remember, there's no definition of what that what happens on that first nibble, right? You're supposed to just operate on the MPLS label stack according to a strict interpretation of the MPLS architecture. These other tricks and techniques are tactical things that people do, and what happens is they do them and it doesn't always work out as they expect. And some operators, and Ignis has spent a lot of time talking to operators, are complaining that these things get turned on in their network, presumably because people don't really understand the problem, or because someone who did understand the problem understood it correctly and there was only Ethernet in their traffic when they turned it on. But, you know, time moves on, the use of the network changes, people add other things, people add other protocols, and then you get the misordering, and then they spend hours trying to sort of go through with Wireshark or whatever the tool they're using is and find out what on earth is happening. So it's that community that have asked us to publish material that helps them resolve the problem. And the only way we can resolve the problem is to provide advice, all right? But at least they can point to an RFC and say, it says, look, it says here, don't do this. Or they can specify adherence to the RFC in their sort of requests for service and stuff.
Yeah.
So, but it's we're not doing this because we think it's a random good thing to do. I mean, even if it is a good thing to do, we're doing it because people have come to us and said, this is happening. It's costing us time and money managing our networks. Please, could you figure out what's going on and fix it for us? And I'm sure if Ignis wants to go to the microphone, he can explain, because he's been the person who's been talking really to the operator community. I will borrow this one for a second.
There's a mute button.
Yeah, it was turned off. Ignas Bogdanas, Equinix. Indeed, and some statistics. So since last meeting, I was speaking about this at least at NanoGripe, EuroAX, some other smaller events, and statistics that I gathered. I see that I had 44 different discussions with different operators. 2 out of those were aware of this problem. To a bigger portion of them, this does not apply. They don't use either pseudo-wires, or they use that in an environment where this problem does not exist, just because the platforms that they are using doesn't exhibit this problem. But still, the awareness of the problem is not there in the field, and this is actually painful. Basically, the cases where this problem surfaces, they show up regularly on various operator groups. And certainly, it's a question of education. Saying that while the architecture allows you to do this, this is not the right thing to do because you will run into the problems. And here is the reference if you want for more details.
Okay, so that's the goal of this document. So next slide, please. Go back and do the last one. Right, no, next slide, please. So the problems that I want to address, I'd like to address at this meeting, are for us to look at the additional the text that we've put in this draft, and what I'd like to do is to try and agree the text on those 2 recommendations. So I'm going to explain the material I've got in here. The last 2 slides are a repeat of the key text, and I'd like to do live editing in this meeting room to at least try and go away with some consensus on what I'm going to put to the list in the form of a new draft. Okay, so next slide, please. So there are 2 key areas of text, all right? The first is on the use of the control word. So in section 4, which is the recommendations text, I've said that this document updates RFC 4448 to state that where both the ingress and the egress PE support the Ethernet pseudowire control word, then the control word must be used. So this tries to steer people away from ever having this this problem. We're
Isn't
going to go
that,
back to this slide. We are going to go back to this slide. You are going to have the opportunity to help.
no,
me.
I understand, but all I'm saying is that that's already there. I'm,
I don't think it says when both. of
when
them can do
both
it.
supports it, the control word should be used.
Yeah, this
If
is.
it's the one doesn't support and one does support, that's when you have to do the negotiation, right?
Yeah, but people are running it anywhere. People are running without the control word for other reasons.
That's right. So I think maybe you want to change this text. That default mode is without the control word, and that's why you want to make the default mode to be using the control word.
No, the default. Well, this is the recommendation that we are telling people going forward, that the expert opinion of this working group is that where both ends support it, you must use it, because that is the safe criteria.
Yeah, it's stating the obvious, but that's
Yes. So also in the operational considerations section, the text I'm proposing is to remove this problem in the long term, and hence to reduce the operational costs of investigating problems associated with the incorrect forwarding of Ethernet packets over pseudowires not using the control word. It is recommended that equipment that does not support the control word be phased out of operational use. We're going to discuss this at the end, because I know that Himanshu's got some opinion on that. All right, so next slide, please. So we met that text before. DPI beyond the deep packet inspection beyond the control word. All right. So section 5 explains that there are two methods that ought to provide safe methods of doing pseudowire ECMP, and they're the FAT label, which is a label that goes in the stack, right at the bottom of the stack, where people can provide entropy. All right, and this predates the later solution, which is that we use an LSP entropy label in the stack. Either of those are acceptable approaches. One is entirely within the domain of the pseudowire application. The other requires, arguably doesn't, and also has some interesting problems when you get gals in the stack as well. There is a caveat, however. RFC 6790 is soft on how ECMP is carried out when the ELI is present. If you look at the text, it says, if a transit LSR recognizes the LSI rather, it may choose to load balance solely on the following label, the entropy label. Now, this is a wider problem because it actually upsets the synonymous label work, and it upsets the any attempt we may make to do IOAM in an MPLS context. So anything that we're doing in the OAM world that wishes to change the stack, those changes should be neutralized by the presence of the ELI. But because of this wording, it is not absolutely the case that it will be. Now, it's not the work of this job of this working group to change the ELI definition, but I think that we should take work to MPLS and request a tightening of those criteria, such that if anyone follows this new RFC, the RFC FOO, that if you see the ELI, then you load balance on the ELI and or the entropy label, and you don't, and you're very careful about anything else you take into account. And I think that would allow us to solve a problem we got on synonymous labels and another problem. It also helps us solve this by making it clear how you're supposed to do load balancing. Next slide, please. So as I said, 6790 is outside the scope of the PALS working group. So I'm going to assume that we'll be having this discussion at some stage in the MPLS working group, because I think it's something that we need to clean up. Next slide, please. So addressing the DPI past the control word is also kind of outside the scope of the PALS working group, because actually it's kind of not architecturally valid anyway, right? It's what people do, but it's not actually, if you ask the MPLS working group, I think they would suggest that it's not actually what MPLS architecture says. So we put, that should be text in this draft, that explains the sort of minimization of the need to do this. And I think we need to take a draft to the MPLS working group at the next IETF. Okay, next slide, please. So what is the proposed text? So two pieces of text. The first one is the recommendation, where the ingress PE supports RFC 6790, the ELI, and both ingress and egress PEs support the FAT pseudowire, RFC 6391, and ECMP of the Ethernet pseudowire traffic is required, then one of these methods, and we can discuss whether it's a should or a must, but the point, the thing here is to say that if the two of them support FAT or one of them supports ELI, that is the preferred method, and that's what we should be doing. There's an operational considerations section as well, change as well. To remove any ECMP based on DPI beyond the pseudowire control word, it is recommended that PEs supporting Ethernet pseudowires implement RFC 6391 and RFC 6790. I've said both because I want to make sure that we can do interoperability, and there will be some kit out there that can do one, some kit out there that can do the other, and so this is actually the minimum change is to do both. You may have an opinion on that. It is further recommended that the use of DPI-based ECMP that looks beyond the pseudowire control word is disabled by default and only enabled if both RFC 6391, that's FAT, and RFC 6790, ELI, are unavailable, and that a risk assessment has been taken on the long-term operational costs and other implications, such as possible out-of-order Ethernet frame delivery. In other words, we're not saying people can't do it. People will want to do it. There are all kinds of circumstances they will. But this is a strong recommendation that if it really is your only choice, or there is some other reason why you want to do it, you really have to take a serious look at the long-term implications for your operations team. Lower.
Are you done?
I think the next two are the text we're going to edit, aren't they?
Yes.
So it's Loa Anderson. I'm one of the MPLS working group chairs. You are talking quite a bit of work to be done in the MPLS working group.
Right. Well, they're only tiny drafts, but
yeah, but it's need to be done.
yes.
So currently, the MPLS agenda for tomorrow is not entirely full.
Okay.
So would it be possible for you to give a 1 or 2 slide kind of a heads up for the MPLS working group, just to
Yes.
get this work on the agenda?
I will. I can't write a draft, but I can certainly explain. Well, how much of this do you want me to explain? Should I provide some more of this background?
I'm more interested that people understand that there is a problem than actually how to solve it.
Okay.
So that's you need to give a heads up. There's something we need to do here.
Right.
Maybe 1 or 2 drafts, rather short,
Right.
and work.
Well, no. I mean, do you want me to? Should I explain the pseudowire background that brought this in?
It's actually, since I got the idea when I sat down there,
Yes.
I haven't really thought about it. So let's close loop.
Yeah. Okay. Amanchu.
So this doesn't look right? Because this is done at the endpoint. This 6391 is something that sort of our endpoints do and not the LSRs.
Correct.
And LSRs are the one who are using that information. They have no idea whether this what is the bottom label, whether that's a fat label or not, right? So you can't. LSR can't. There is no. I mean, if you read the paragraph, it doesn't look. LSR. There is
Which
no
paragraph?
capability in LSR
So which one?
to recognize.
Sorry. Which paragraph do you?
I'm talking about section 7.
Right. Okay. So this is so I guess the question for the group is, what advice do we give the operations team? I mean, I think it's important that they understand there is a problem. that I mean, sure that the configuration guide for the PE won't control what the P routers are doing, but they should read this and say, I better go and talk to my friends in the P router space and make sure that they're not going to screw up these packets, so that the two of us don't spend a bunch of time trying to sort out an incorrectly delivered SLA for our customer.
No, but the paragraph doesn't make sense. So if you start reading from, it is further recommended that the use of the DPI based ECMP that looks beyond pseudo-wire control is disabled by default and only enabled if both 6391 and 6790 are unavailable.
Yes.
So, I mean, so you are a P router, there are thousands of PE routers and pseudo wires going through you.
Yes.
And some are doing something and others are doing other things. How are you going to, on that P router, decide or disable or enable the behavior of where to do and how to do ECMP? Right? Do you see what I'm trying to say here?
Yeah, but I think Adrian is. Yeah.
Again, I interpret this paragraph as don't do it by default.
Yes.
And if you to do DPI hashing, then it has to be a conscious decision.
Yes.
Yes, if you have some conditions that you cannot do otherwise,
Yes.
at least you make it as a understandably and with the understanding of personal consequences.
Yes,
of that.
that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, so I think it's a reasonable text which recommends you to think before you do, because if it's default behavior, you don't analyze it.
Right. So I think the sort of steps I'm trying to sort of emphasize are, if you need to do ECMP, then there are other, think about trying to use the other techniques, and only if you can't do that, think about this other method, but think very carefully about the long-term consequences. So do it with your eyes open. And I think that's what Greg was trying to, yeah. So I think we both.
Maybe that's your intention, but I think the text is not.
All right.
Doesn't say that.
So my plan for the meeting, and we can do it a different way if you want, is to get Andy to put this text up, and we will attempt to produce in ITU, IEEE, whatever it is, style, the text that we think should go forward. Adrian.
Adrian Farrell, apologies for turning up as a tourist in your working group and then jumping in. Is the intention of this work only to talk about ECMP performed at egress PEs?
No.
Okay.
Because I mean, the original intention was, but during the discussion on the list, an operator said, actually, the problem is much worse than you think. This is happening, so we need to address that. They did suggest a solution. One of their solutions was that we turn on control word sequence number checking, but I don't think there would be much consensus for it, and I'm not sure it's supported in any of the equipment that's in the field.
Maybe I should phrase my question differently. Is the intention of this work to cover ECMP performed at P routers?
I think it has to, because it appears that P routers are screwing up our packets.
Are you aware that ECMP performed at P routers happens in a very wide variety of ways, some of which your proposals would break? And would it not be better to write something that describes what behavior is required of ECMP, rather than try to describe ways that ECMP must or must not be performed, given that you ain't going to change silicon?
No, but I can change. I believe the systems that do this have got a switch that you have to turn on to cause it to happen, and so it would be reasonable to make sure that people know the consequences of turning that switch. John?
John Drake, your text says nothing about P routers.
No, I know it doesn't.
Then it's basically unenforceable.
It's basically,
Unenforceable.
so why don't we go, to the next pair of slides and people can suggest alternative text.
Okay. I'm
Right.
taking this out of slideshow mode and putting this into edit mode.
So here is I'm assuming that these are the key pieces of text in the document. I assume that we will agree on those, and then the authors will make the rest of the document align with whatever we agree here, and then we'll go through the standard process. But I was hoping to get some active sort of discussion on what this needs to be to try and sort of get there a bit faster. So those are the two pieces of text. I mean, obviously, as the author, I quite like these pieces of text, but I'm not precious about them. Does anyone wish to propose changing this text to say anything different?
This text now is not the text on ECMP. This is the text on the use of the control word. We'll do ECMP on the next slide. So is there anyone who has any comments on either Section 4 or Section 7 text that we are now displaying? If there are no comments, then this is the text that will be in the draft.
So, the text is fine. Okay, we are kind of hoping that people will read this RFC
Yes.
and suddenly start doing the right thing,
Yes.
which is a pipe dream in a sort of way. But text is fine. Yes,
Okay,
as
thank
far
you.
as this text.
Okay.
Okay.
Section 4 and section 7. Okay, Himanshu, as far as you're concerned.
This particular text in Section 4 and Section 7 will
Yes.
stay as it is now
Yes.
being shown.
Right.
Now, we have other text in Section 4 and Section 7 that we'll be talking about in a minute. Hi, Pat.
Okay. Right. So let's go to the other problem.
Okay, this is the ECMP text.
Yes. So here's the text I dealt with. So the first question I've got is Section 4, the recommendation. Is that text okay, and which keyword should we use? All right.
Okay, so yeah,
Let's just do
this
the
text-
first. We're just doing the first paragraph. to start with.
the Section 4 first paragraph, and so you should use one of these methods. But if both are available,
Yes.
should they use both or one or the other?
Well, it says then one of these methods should be used. That's what it said. And you probably don't want to use both. I don't think it's harmful to use both. I'm not quite sure whether the behavior is well defined if you use
Exactly.
both.
Yeah.
But I say one.
Right.
So should we say?
Should we extend that if both are there, only one of them? Yeah. A little bit more explicit on that. Correct.
Anyone else want to comment on this paragraph?
How about, yes.
Does anyone think that it's reasonable to put that that we shouldn't use both?
I think
Name and microphone, please, for the record.
I find that wording a little hard to parse because both should not be used, could be interpreted as you shouldn't use either. Only one should be used.
Thank
Yes.
you. Only one should be
And
used.
Pat Thaler, Broadcom.
Yes,
Very
yes.
good. Thank you.
Yeah, we know who you are, but the record should show it.
I'm still Adrian. ELI has slightly different usage rules from the FAT thingy, as far
Yes.
as I recall, in that ELI can be placed midway in the stack.
Yes.
And it can be placed midway in the stack for the reason that somebody using it might not be able to get all the way down to the bottom of the stack.
Yes.
This language implies that you're kind of free to choose which one you use,
Yes.
without, which gives the implication that given a free choice, I might as well just use fat, which is not going to help you get through the P routers that need the ELI halfway up the stack.
So you would prefer that we recommend that you use ELI if both are available?
Oh, Andy, I'd prefer you weren't doing this work at all.
Well, we wouldn't do it except we were asked to do it.
Well,
by-
there is a problem that needs to be solved. I
Yes.
don't believe that this approach is the right approach to solve the problem. I believe that describing what behavior you must not create when you move packets around is a better way of doing it than pointing out, well, you could do this thing here and this widget here and change these defaults. Just tell people what they must not screw up in the network and allow people then to go and implement.
So you'd like to see a completely different draft?
Yes. Which I guess means I'd like to see section 4 struck. And then we'll go on and talk about section 7 and I'll say, oh, I'd like to see section 7 struck and so on.
Well, there is other text besides this,
Yes.
sections 4 and section 7.
Yes.
So, I guess to, what Adrian is saying is somewhat true, but the draft, the 6790 says that it also applies for the pseudo wires as well,
Yes.
which means that to identify a microflow within the pseudo wire, you can still either use the ELI-EL,
Yep.
or you can use the FAT pseudo wire.
Right.
And I view this within the context of that.
Right.
Obviously, when you have hierarchical LSPs or IP over MPLS and so on and so forth, you can use ELI there as well.
Yep.
But this specific text is at ingress PE doing the pseudo wire and identifying the flow within the pseudo wires.
Yeah.
right?
My assumption is
So
that-
you may want to, if you put that in context, in that context, it's not hierarchical LSP, it's not IP over MPLS, it is pseudo wire over at ingress PE, and between the two, fat pseudo wire or ELI EL you would use.
Well, hang on a second. The context is already provided. This is the whole document is about Ethernet pseudo wires.
Yes.
I'm assuming that the PE knows the context. After all, it's
Right.
been given this pseudo wire, been told this Ethernet packet, it's been told to perform. this
I
CMP.
understand,
So
but
it
I
kind
think
of
that
knows
what
the context.
Adrian was saying
Is-
is because of that confusion, right?
Right.
If you just look at this text without the context that it is the ingress PE that is doing pseudo wire and a microflow within the pseudo wire,
Right.
you have two schemes available. One is to just push the fat pseudo wire
Yes.
label
Yep.
if you ingress any, or you can do ELI and EL.
Right.
And you choose one
Yes.
of the two, right? So
Hey, Andrew Dolgan on Nokia. So I'm like having showed as a visitor and I have to actually put stuff in. This is extremely, guys, misleading. The both has to be spelled out because in English language, both means ECMP and FAT. Doesn't even go to ELI. The present, so we have to
How
spell
about
it
that?
out. Yeah. Then do
They're
you mean
really
present
available.
or
They're really
supported?
available rather than present.
Do you mean present or supported? I'm assuming you mean
Yes.
supported
Yeah, it means available or supported. Yes.
on
I
that.
just said
key.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That one will.
So, are we comfortable with? Yeah.
Sorry, Matthew Bocci, Nokia. So I think I'm comfortable with the first one, although ELI and FAT were not really about stopping hashing on pseudo-wires. They were about identifying microflows on
Yes,
pseudo-wires,
yes,
so
yeah.
enabling those microflows
Yeah.
not to be spread, not to be reordered, not the whole
Yeah.
pseudo-wire. So I think some of the context maybe is lost a little bit in this.
Okay.
But given what we're trying to achieve here, maybe it helps. Section 7, I kind of think I agree with Adrian.
Let's
talking
finish
here-
section 4 first.
Can we finish 4? Then you
Yeah,
can be at the
so,
front of
okay.
the line for 7.
So, no, I think 4, I'm okay. with.
Okay.
Okay, now we just
Now-
need
now-
to choose between should and must.
I have one question on the last sentence.
Oh, yes.
If you have a multi-segment pseudo wire, is enough to use only ELI? Because you have to carry ELI from the two PSNs.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
In multi-segment, you're just swapping the pseudo wire label.
No, but you've lost all of the MPLS stack by that point.
Yes.
So,
The whole of the MPLS stack has gone away before you.
well, how is that? In the multi-segment pseudo wire, you have a pseudo wire label, and below that, either you have fat pseudo wire label or ELI EL. There's nothing to do, and you just swap the pseudo wire label.
No.
What no?
It depends on what order you put them in, right? So unless the ELI is below the pseudo wire label,
Okay.
well, fat is the way to do it below the pseudo wire label normally.
Okay.
You're saying do it with ELI below the pseudo wire
No,
label.
okay, sir. I think that I'm just trying to visualize.
Yes.
If LI is before the pseudo wire label,
Yes.
it's not necessarily lost. We're talking about implementation.
Yes.
Okay, so I would say that if ELI is above pseudo wire, then it may be available and used for the next segment.
Right.
Okay, so again, this is implementation details, but putting ELI above pseudo wire label is good enough.
So is that is me again?
Putting ELI above pseudo wire label is good enough for multi-segment pseudo wire to continue using the same ELI value.
Directly above.
Yes.
Well, if it's directly above, you would have to, because it'll be popped before you get the.
Again, it's popped virtually. It doesn't have to be popped and thrown away.
Well,
it's implementation.
Right, but I think
if we say that this is scenario that we recommend,
yes,
okay, people who do that or who implement have to think about it and do the right thing.
No. Yeah.
Well, no, but you always, I mean, you, I mean, it's an LSP that terminate, an SPE that terminates the LSP is
Yes.
always going to pop the whole label stack by definition.
Yes.
Except for the pseudo
Yeah.
label, and it will advertise, for example, entropy label capability
Yes.
to show that it can receive and process the entropy label without chucking the packet away. So I don't understand why we're talking about passing the entropy label across. I mean, it's not.
You wouldn't normally do that, would
You
you?
wouldn't normally do that. You'd have to regenerate it. Well,
Yes.
you could do what you like with it, to be honest. You could
Yes.
either just copy the value or you
But
could
it might not
regenerate it,
even
but there's no
rec-
assumption here.
Yes, you can be no assumption it even receives it because it could. Does the entropy label stay there?
Yeah, unless you're doing PHP.
Yeah, if you're doing PHP, does it stay there?
Oh.
And the answer is I don't know. I think it's completely ambiguous whether it stays there or not. There's no need for it to stay there.
There's no need for it to stay there. I don't think we can make any assumption here about whether it's there or not.
No.
In this document.
So fat is actually the safer method of doing this because that would work because that's below the pseudo-wire label, and so would unconditionally work in both multi-segment and single segment.
Well, so yeah, because it's the only one that's signaled end to end.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't think we've quite got that section 4 text right yet.
Yeah.
So I have a concern. I think if you were looking through the label stack to find the ELI, and you
Yes.
find it, do you at that point in time know if you are above or below the fat label?
Above or below the?
So you're saying that there's a difference whether if the ELI is above or below the fat label. When you
Yes.
search the label stack, you're looking for the ELI. You're not looking for anything else. So you don't at that point know if you're above or below the fat label. I don't know if I'm correct. I asked.
So the fat label is the bottom of stack.
Yeah.
It's defined to immediately follow the pseudowire label. Because what happens when you're handling the fat label is you do ECMP on the whole stack, or at least the bottom label in the stack. And then when you're at the egress PE, you say, this is a pseudowire. I've got it because I can tell that from the pseudowire label. But I know this one is followed by a fat label, so I'll discard it. So that's what you do at the egress PE. At the SPE, you just do a swap on the pseudowire label.
Italo Busi from Huawei speaking. Just suggest maybe can we make it easier saying that we require that at least one of these two methods should be used, and let the implementers decides what to do, if one or both. You say at least one of these two methods has to be used, and whether you use one, which one, and whether you use both depends on you.
So that's what the text here says. Use at least one.
Yeah, at least one. Add at least before one, and yeah, exactly. Yes, just say at least. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so what would you like to distract?
So the question is, can we do it by doing a crossing out through thing so people can see it?
Which text?
If the sentence, if both ELI and FAT are supported, only ELI should be used.
Okay.
So the suggestion is
To strike that?
just strike that.
Yeah. And maybe add at least in front of one, so to say one or both. Because
So do we know what happens if you use both?
Oh, that's a good question.
I have no idea. I think it will probably just work. I think, but I have no idea. I have no idea what implementations will do.
I think it all depends on how you parse your label stack.
Yes.
Which label you hit first.
Yeah, and every vendor has got multiple ways of doing it, so it's not even a vendor A versus vendor B problem. It's every platform probably does it differently.
Yeah.
I think we should say only one of these methods should be used, and we should even say if he recommends using both, then behavior cannot be dependent because really
Yeah, you just have to select one, and I wouldn't phrase the last sentence as saying that ELI does not work for multi-segment pseudowires. I think what we mean is it must be enabled for each segment.
Right, but how does it do the load balance? How does it do the load balance?
Because it's load balancing between LSRs, it's not load balancing across SPEs.
No. But how? So you're supporting ELI.
Right, but we're not making an assumption here about how you're generating the hash in the entropy label. This could be copied across. It could be by some magic on the box.
So this is not really correct, then, is it?
I think you should just say that entropy label should be used on every segment.
Yes. So that's going to now say.
How's that?
No, we're not saying it does not work. We're saying in the case of multi-segment pseudowires, ELI should be used on every segment.
Yeah.
Okay. In the case of multi-segment.
I was saying if entropy label is used, then ELI should be supported on every segment or used on every segment.
No, if ELI is used.
Or used on every segment.
Does that work better? Yeah?
Yeah.
And then it's up to the vendors to figure out how they make it get used and
Yeah.
whether they.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Only one. Thank you. There.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a should, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So everyone here, we'll get to another chance to look at this. Everyone here happy with this text so far? Okay. So section 7.
So I'm not convinced. I'm not sure that this should be in this draft
Okay.
because this is talking about P routers
Right.
that have no idea what services, what services
Right.
have been transported end to end. They could be in transit providers. They could be carrying the majority of the traffic could be just IP.
Right.
Or something. So if you're going to make recommendations about how to configure or do load balancing on LSRs,
Yes.
I think that probably should at least be in a draft in the MPLS working group, not here.
Okay.
I don't think we want to go and talk about DP like this. Is like this will open Pandora box.
So
Everybody will then start talking. Oh, we need to talk about DPI here. We need to talk about DPI here. Why it's here? Why suddenly we're talking here? Not there?
well, so
It will be like everywhere, across all the groups.
well,
Like, stop
so,
using this to this.
so here's the problem I have, that when I looked at the example text from the sort of release note stroke user manual or whatever it was that was circulated on the pseudowire list, it was actually stated in the context of pseudowires. So this is not someone randomly sort of doing this thing. It's a feature for use in conjunction with pseudowires. The only reason it ever looks to check for 0 is to detect the presence of an Ethernet pseudowire. So it is really in the scope of this working group to comment on features associated with pseudowires. Now, you could argue that we should also talk about it in MPLS, and I would absolutely support that. But this is a pseudowire feature that appears on one, I am told, more than one network operating system. So,
but we're just picking up one of the technology bins. Like I can be hashing for any other things under that stack. I can be doing many other things. Why we out of a sudden talking about DPI than anything else? And like, I don't think it's in the scope.
sorry, you don't think it's in scope?
I don't think it's a scope for us to talk about.
But the reason it got here is because when I circulated the draft, someone put a comment on the pseudowire list saying, I think you need to do much more than you're proposing. And they cited this. They actually said we should use sequence numbers.
Start a work group that talks about DPI and the impact on routing, layer 2, layer like this is Pandora box. I don't like anyway.
Andrew,
I voiced my opinion.
Okay,
It's not a rare box, by the way.
Sorry. Well, the thing is, the comment about sequence numbering is trying to specify something about what the P is doing, not what
Yes.
the P routers are doing.
Right.
So what we can do here, I think, is to say we could, if there's load balancing going on in the network, how can we design pseudowires so that they don't get impacted by this?
Right.
Negatively. We can't say, I think, how do we redesign LSRs?
No, but this is a pseudowire feature that has been added to some routers, and so I'm going to argue that it is in our context, given that it's a pseudowire feature that's been added. It looks and assumes that it's found one of our pseudowires.
But it's not a PE that's doing it, is it? And it's not in.
So, do you think we should not sort of warn vendors, warn operators that this effect is being seen, given that an operator said, I've got this problem and it's caused me harm?
No, I'm just thinking that the discussion should be more general than just pseudowires. Take into account why operators will be doing hashing in general on
Right.
LSR.
But sure, that is a discussion to be had, absolutely.
Yes.
But in this particular case, there is a particular feature that makes the assumption that you're using Ethernet pseudowires and does its processing based upon that assumption.
And we're not saying that you shouldn't do it. We're just saying be careful because it has caused misorder.
And it's not always correct because it assumes that every pseudowire is an Ethernet pseudowire.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that.
Yes.
I'm just struggling with how this is. I appreciate that the assumption of this feature is that it's a pseudowire.
Yes.
Or the encapsulation is a pseudowire, but it's not a PE, and it's not in our architecture.
Right.
It sounds like a proprietary feature. So
it's an incorrect feature. Which
well, no, that's not
unfortunately-
entirely true.
Well-
There are some circumstances in limited networks where it might make sense. All right, it's not one that I would recommend anyone implement, but I can understand because there are better ways of doing it. But I can understand why people might have done this. The issue is to make sure that they fully appraise themselves of the risks associated with doing it, and that's all I really wanted to put in. We could say less, but I do think that maybe we need. I think there's a legitimate case for us as the pseudowire experts saying, an interesting feature, but do your risk assessment because, and we say this on the basis that an operator complained to us that our pseudowires didn't work properly because this feature got turned on. Well, DPI isn't entirely out of scope because we've got a whole load of text in here explaining how to obviate the need for it.
I think given the concerns that we have,
yes,
we should, I think, take this to the MPLS group and have the MPLS group, because it is largely the function of an LSRs.
Yes.
Right. So, I mean, it's not within the scope of the PALS working group to specify what the behavior of an LSR ECMP should be. Right. I think there is a confusion. Some pseudowires have this control word that has it enabled. Other pseudowires may not. There is also IP over MPLS is going on, and so on and so forth. What should be the right behavior at the LSR?
Right.
Right. So it's very problematic with respect to what should be the right behavior. Right. I mean, I understand what we want to say.
Yes.
But it just doesn't gel well.
Right.
So, if I understand this correctly, this is the operational consideration section.
Yes.
So, I don't have a problem with the PALS working group actually describing a behavior that actually caused by the design of the pseudowires.
Right.
So it's fine to describe it here.
Yes.
Maybe when it comes to actually writing down a more specification-like text that actually should go in the one of the drafts we talked about earlier in the MPLS working group. So I'm kind of splitting it up. Describe the problem, and then we can.
So the plan is to replace this with text that instead of describing what the recommendation is, just say it can be problematic. It can be problematic doing DPI based on on an assumption that it's a pseudowire, and that you should think very carefully about doing it.
So when you bring this into a MPLS working group draft, you probably want to have a little bit more background than problematic.
Over here. Yes.
So again, as somebody who actually did DPI, saying that we're removing that pseudo-wire control will replace DPI is naive. Going to any recommendation is naive. Getting into the DPI and how we can solve it or not solve it is seriously, guys. It's like this. Like, just don't do this. Or if you wanna do this, think well what you're trying to do and work with your vendor to make sure this will work, because by definition it will not. Like, I think that we can say. Everything else is just like bending and writing text.
So you think we should just, the proposal is to remove this text, replace it with text explaining the problem.
That would be that's probably more,
Right.
Okay, more specific.
So do we want to attempt to do that now? I don't know how many more minutes we've got for this and how much you want to do it. Or do I have a go at doing it and put it to the list? So I'll just sort of say in some cases, vendors make this assumption. They should be very careful when they do it and consider using an alternative supported method. Okay. We want to attempt to capture that. That should be operators.
Yeah, you're right.
So my question is that are we considering that some implementations do DPI for ECMP handling even past control word?
Yes, that's the problem.
Should the bastard?
Sorry?
Should the bastard?
Unfortunately,
so I was stunned when I discovered it was happening, because my assumption whenever we designed this is that it wouldn't happen. It does happen. I can understand why they did it.
Okay. And just on a more serious note, in the first paragraph.
I should say, by the way, we should clarify for the record.
Actually, that's my son put on his door that those who enter will be shot, survivors will be shot again.
I should clarify for the record that Greg is only joking when he uses these.
Yeah. But on a serious note, on the first paragraph that edited the text, take a look whether it's capital must or it's just must as not normative.
Where?
On a multi-segment pseudowire, the must is a lowercase now. So do you want to use a capital or not?
Thank you. That's his point.
Yeah,
Is that must or should? I think it's.
How do you enforce it?
I think should is probably the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be capital at all. What you're talking about is the point.
Yes.
The capital would refer to support the product.
Right.
So make it capital if you want, but it's up to the carriers.
Right. Which is why should is probably better than must.
Yeah.
My point is that the capital implies support in a company compliance.
Oh, right. I see what you mean. Yes.
This relates to the point.
Right. I think you're right.
I would not capitalize any of it.
Yeah. Okay.
So if whatever the switch that is doing that, the control with the looking for control word 0 and doing a DPI below, they don't know whether fat pseudo wire is a pseudo wire label or or something else, right?
No, they don't need to.
So
because
it's going to bypass that. If they are doing it, they are doing it, right?
Yes.
The fat pseudowire label is not going to stop because they can't recognize that there is a fat pseudowire
Exactly.
label.
So this
It's
is why
the same. Another thing is,
So we talking about section 4 or section 7 here?
right. So yeah, that's why section 7 never made any sense.
Right. So that's the plan for section 7. Is there a? Yeah, I think we have.
Yeah.
So section 7. So are we happy that section 7 is approximately right?
Such a high bar.
Approximately right.
Happy?
John.
Even if the PEs implemented this,
Yes.
they would still be subject to the same behavior that they get today.
Yeah.
Sorry, they would still be. I'm not sure.
Subject to the same behavior they get today. So this is pretty much useless. If you've got the problem, it's between two PEs that are misordering packets, that are dealing with misordered packets.
Yes.
The right answer is for those PEs to implement sequence numbers and correct the order of the packet.
Yeah, do we want to really implement sequence numbers?
If you've got a problem, that's the way to solve it. Because if you don't change the PE behavior, you're still going to have a problem.
Well, you could try and persuade the network operator to ask the ops team to turn off this behavior.
Yeah,
Which is what,
which is what he's saying. He's saying that because it's not recognizable, the
Yes.
fat pseudowire label is not recognizable, and if they go below the last bottom of the stack label and look at the control word and then do a DPI below that, they're not unless they disable that or not stop doing that, it's gonna continue.
right.
doing
So,
that.
so the hope was to try and encourage them to turn the feature off in the network.
Right.
I mean,
You cannot, but you cannot, because again, I'm just
yeah.
assuming.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Probably not.
Yes.
They're using
It's not
DPI
probably not disableable feature.
application level
Yes.
CMP. That doesn't mean they do a flow level CMP, they do an application level CMP, which may be multiple flows correlated.
Right. Yes. I don't know what they actually CMP on.
We like guessing what they like.
Right.
So if you want to say, if you do something stupid and you're using DPI for it, continue doing it, but look at this RFC because you probably don't need it.
Yes.
But you may or may not need it because if they actually correlate multiple flows to an application level, then it's more than just IP tuples that you can somehow.
Yes. Yes.
and
Yes.
control flow
Yes.
selection, basically. Which is still you moving the DPI, you're doing live DPI. So like really, we're just gonna be talking about stuff that it's hard to define unless somebody having a problem doing something.
Right.
Yeah, God knows what. And I reference Greg's comment.
Okay, I hope that there will be no limit. There's no limit.
Seriously, I'm not sure why, like, it's hard to, we're trying to solve a problem for somebody that does something very specific
Yes.
that we may or may not solve, and
Right. So I don't think this act. Well.
The worst part is it may not be disableable feature. It's data plane is doing it, it's doing it. You can't say disable this CMP below the control word.
if somebody implemented that,
Yes.
and they're doing DPI based.
So someone has implemented it.
What I'm saying, if somebody, and I come from software, I wrote software. So I can tell you-
Oh, come on, that's not believable.
Yeah, no, I know. If somebody on my team implemented it
Yes.
and wrote software for this,
Yes.
and they looking at labels in
Yes.
addition to DPI, they should be fired. Because, so which means when you introduce this RFC, nothing should happen, and the same problems or solutions they had, they will have. Because if you're trying to do too much, then you're trying to do too much. So they either doing DPI and it works today, and this will work, and none of that stuff will be enabled, because when you're doing something on DPI, you're not doing anything else. You're not gonna look at IP addresses and stuff like this because it's just part of your DPI algorithm.
Well, I don't know what they're looking at.
Well,
But,
but like,
Yes.
you're doing DPI because what you have on layer 1 to 4 is not enough. So whatever we're gonna add in layer 2 and a half,
actually,
it doesn't.
I mean,
gonna
so I don't know what they're doing. I can't, because I can't remember the exact text of the user manual, but one suspects it's just the standard tuple.
Anyway.
So currently, I have just got it as a warning. I guess I'll go to the list with a new version of the text, and hopefully those that expressed an opinion can express an opinion on the list. The list gets very quiet, which is why we've been using this working group session as a working group time to try and make some progress.
Actually, if we assume that somebody does DPI past the control word, then it will affect not only Ethernet frames. Because again, we mentioned that we do have different kinds of pseudowires.
Yes, exactly.
So I would say then the pseudowire payload can be delivered out of order, not necessarily.
Yes, you're right. Yes, you're right. You're right. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg.
So I'm going to write up a version of make the changes to the document. I'll put it out on the list shortly after I get home. Hopefully people can take a more considered view, and we'll discuss it some more tomorrow.
Okay.
Can I just throw a last comment?
Yep.
Whoever commented on the list for this,
Yes.
we invite you to the group, explain this problem, and then we'll see what we solve it instead of guessing.
Yeah.
Not that you ignore this.
Okay.
To be fair, they showed up.
Like if they had a problem, explain what exactly the problem is. Second guessing what they're doing.
Andrew.
No. They did actually point. To be fair, they did point to a specific vendor, which I'm not going to name here.
It's already,
I'm talking about what they're doing with the feature. So we
Andrew,
understand the problem.
Yes.
Andrew, it's already on the list, and the official record
Yes.
is on the list, as always, in every IETF working group. So you can take your comments to the list as well.
The specific pointer was made to the list of what the problem was.
Yeah. People do not have to be physically present at an IETF meeting in order to make a point. Okay.
Okay, are we?
Okay.
So with one thing you got to do,
Yes,
and then we're done.
We have one more point of order, and in that we intend to send a liaison from the IETF to a number of partner STOs that make use of pseudowires in order to inform them of this work and the existence of the draft. Dave?
Okay, so, well, yeah, so two things. One, I don't think there's any objection to us sending this thing out. But two, the groups that we have listed here are BBF, ITU, Study Group 15, IEEE 802, and should it go to IEEE RAC?
Who do you think in the IEEE space?
Who should this go to in IEEE? Definitely 802.1, right? And then the other one was MEF. And then the liaison would briefly state the issue, point to the recommendations and the updated RFC or the draft, and ask that the draft be taken into consideration in either previous or future work. And at this point, based on the maturity of the text, I would hold off on this for at least a couple weeks.
Right, yes.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pat, you can just pull the microphone out.
Okay, yeah. Let's see. So, trying to figure out, I don't know what, so the purpose of sending it to the RAC or to, I'm not sure I see understand what the purpose of sending it to the RAC was. I mean, they care about ether type. They don't.
Right. It was
Yeah.
them that raised the issue. So the only effect of sending the liaison is, hey, look, we're doing something about it.
Right. I think
not to change anything.
Yeah. And I think, yeah. I think probably, I would say the rack and probably 802.1, IEEE 802.1, because I think that's who cares most at this level. Either that, or you certainly can send it to 802 as a whole, and we will figure out where in 802 to go. But I would copy 802.1 to Chair Glenn,
Okay. So I'm gonna, just to be more detailed, so we'd send it to the BBF, the ITU, and MEF for action, so they can actually do something with it.
Yeah,
We would send it to 802.1 and the rack for information.
right, yeah.
And actually possibly to correct any errors around assumptions that we've made, because I don't think I covered all the cases that you brought up last time.
Right, for review, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so, rack chair is Bob Groh and Glenn Parsons for 802.1.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Do we have any other business? Thank you. We are adjourned until London. See you there.
Thank you.
Thank you all.